Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegone, Minnesota, my hometown. It's starting to turn green up there. Trees blossoming out a little bit, lilacs have a little mist of green on them. Some of those little crocuses starting to poke their heads up. Some of the people starting to sort of come alive too. Though in my hometown, sometimes it's not easy to tell. We Wobegonians, even when we are in love, what to us is a romantic passion appears as only mild interest. Because we're low-key people. And when we're mad, when we're angry and upset, it appears about the same as when we're in love. It's hard to tell. Makes marriage complicated if you've married somebody from the outside who doesn't know how to read those subtle signs. An Auslander, you know. You could come home upset, and she'd look at you and put her arms around you and misinterpret things entirely. Which happened to Pastor Inkvist the other day. I believe it was Tuesday. He was walking along the street, and he heard someone cry out in anger to the Lord, a phrase not often heard spoken that loud in that part of town, outdoors, by a woman. And he was surprised, and he turned back to look, and just at that moment he walked straight into a parking meter. And that same phrase sort of occurred to him as he sank slowly down onto the concrete. 2 parking meters in town, and he ran into one of them. Didn't run, walked, but it was the same. He sat there for a moment and collected his senses, what he could find of them, and walked home just as Judy was pulling in the driveway. And he kind of limped along in a kind of a strange gait across the lawn towards her, and she took one look at him and she said, "No, I know what you're thinking, and not now. Later maybe, but not now. I've got to make supper." So it's strange it's hard to understand people in my hometown, men especially, I should say, by what they show on their faces. Clarence Bunsen was up at the Chatterbox Cafe with a kind of a placid look on his face the other day. I believe it was Wednesday, and was having some of Dorothy's corn chowder, and he got a little bit of the corn stuck way back in a back molar, and he was picking it out with a toothpick. And suddenly he felt a rock in his mouth, and he spat it out, and it went boing in the bowl, and there it was, the big gold cap of a back molar. He could feel with his tongue this little sharp point of a tooth left back there. It tasted kind of rotten, kind of disgusting, and he was feeling it with his tongue as he walked down to the post office. And so he was a little bit distracted because he went down to the post office because his daughter Barbara Ann is expecting her first child this summer, and he was looking for a letter from her. He opened up his box and looked into it and pulled out some junk mail and some shoppers and circulars and pulled the stuff out, and there at the back of his box was the postmaster's face peering in at him. Bob Bowser looking at him and said, "Morning, Clarence." Clarence wasn't thinking, and Bob said, "Bonnie was asking me if you and Arlene wouldn't come up to supper on Thursday night." And Clarence was so distracted, he didn't have time to think of a lie right away. He said, "Thursday? Oh, you mean this? You mean tomorrow night? Thursday? Let me see, Thursday." Trying to think of something plausible they might be doing that night that he could make plans for as soon as he left the post office. "Thursday," he said, "there's but there's a kind of a 20-second time limit on that lie, you know. You have to come up with it quick. Thursday, he said, okay. All right, he heard the buzzer go off. All right, Thursday night, sure, I'll tell Arlene. Arlene couldn't believe it. She said, the Bowsers, they don't owe us supper. They don't owe us supper. We were the last ones. We were up there. We went to their house. And that was in 1964, I think. What are they thinking of? Well, they didn't know. Arlene and Clarence walked up to the Bowsers. Clarence was kind of afraid that Bob wouldn't serve any liquor, so he took along 4 rum-filled chocolates wrapped in gold foil, put them in his pocket, try and ease the way through the supper, and had 2 of them on his way up there. They sat, supper passed, sort of quietly, because Bob keeps the radio on while they eat, you know, not to wear anybody out in unnecessary conversation. He keeps the radio on, turned up, so they sat there and afterwards went into the living room. And Bonnie sat down at her new electric organ and was going to play them a tune. And Arlene said, something's changed here in your living room. Something's different. Trying to think back to 1964. Bonnie said, well, I got this from the Kmart. She said, she held up a lamp. She said, this is I believe they call it a voice-sensitive lamp. You watch when I sing. You see how it flickers. The light flickers. It makes different patterns or something. So she placed her hands on the keyboard in the C chord position, and she played a little bit. I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. Chicka, 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 chicka. In my heart I have but one desire. Arlene was thinking all the time, what is different in this room? Statuary's all there, the state plates are there, the spoons, plastic plants. What's odd? Heart I have but one desire, and that one is you. None other will do. Chugga, 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 chugga. Arlene said, your couch, you've got a new love seat. What happened to your old couch? Bob shot them a sharp and a bitter look. He said, she threw out my couch. He said, I tell you, until she brings it back, he said, I'm sleeping in Bernetta's bed. Bernetta is their daughter. She doesn't live there anymore, but it shocked Clarence to hear it. And he grabbed a rum-filled chocolate out of his pocket, and he ate it, gold foil and all. He chomped down on it. And have you ever had a bare tooth and you chomp down on the gold foil? Oh! Gosh, it just reawakened that dead nerve. He said, oh, it hurt. So that's why he was out walking that night. 1 o'clock in the morning, he was walking around town, feeling that old molar in the back of his mouth. 2 o'clock in the morning, Clarence was walking. 2:30, 3 o'clock. After that, I don't know. I went to bed myself, so I don't know what he did after that. I was up because I was feeling bad. This was Thursday night, early Friday morning. I was feeling bad. I always feel bad in springtime. And I know I shouldn't. I know you're supposed to feel happy in Easter and Passover and all, and yet I just don't. I never do. I always feel sad. It's a time of change. Spring is, and a time when nature seems to remind us in many different ways that we are temporary and we can be replaced. The world changes so dramatically, and it raises your hopes in ways that can't be fulfilled. feel sad, sadder and sadder as I get older in the springtime. It's like an old, sweet tune that I can't dance to anymore. Not that I ever could dance exactly, because I was raised in a fundamentalist home, as you may be able to tell if you ever see me walk across a room, you know, or sit down in a chair. We were not allowed to dance or engage in any kind of a rhythmic physical movement, be in a marching band or anything else like that. And as a result, I tend to move sort of like God has not quite figured out how to work the strings, you know, and doesn't know which are the leg strings and which works the lower jaw. Kind of grope my way around a lack of physical grace due to my upbringing among the sanctified brethren. Sweet, good Christian people, and yet they do leave their mark on a boy. I try to be as graceful as I can. I try to walk into a room, I try to sweep into a room now, carrying a little glass of kind of a white Zinfandel in my left hand, and try and sweep into a room, and people look at me sweep, and they say, "You're Baptist, aren't you?" But I'm not, see. We considered Baptists to be loose. We were the other way, and we couldn't dance because we were afraid. We were supposed to be afraid that it could awaken our carnal desires. Dancing might awaken them. My carnal desires were not only awake, they were dressed and had had their breakfast and were out waiting for the bus to come and pick them up. But this was the theory in my youth. I just wanted to dance with girls so that they would understand me better and know that what I lacked in aptitude I more than made up for in sheer interest. But I never got a chance. The school bus was my first contact, I guess, with girls, and kind of a strange one, because if I've told you this before, I apologize. I lived out in the country at the end of the school bus route, the last person to be picked up. And as a rule, all the seats were filled when I got on, but Wendell, the bus driver, made me find one anyway. And nobody would let me sit down by them. I was about 10, 12 years old at the time of which I speak. And I had to hurl myself at a seat with the tiniest girls in it. I would just hurl myself at them and force my way in and push them in, and then brace my foot against the seat opposite and push against them. And that was my first physical contact with girls, was pushing on them and hitting them with my elbow as they were pushing me back and saying, "Get up, get away, ish, go on." So you can understand if my attitudes might be strange now. It was an odd upbringing, especially in the spring when you hoped and wished and wanted things to be different. Standing out there on a gravel road in your best new spring shirt and spring jacket and your chino pants and a pair of penny loafers, a new pair of penny loafers. I couldn't believe my mother would go for something so impractical as penny loafers, standing there waiting for the yellow bus to come and imagining that this morning it would be different and that the door would open and Wendell would smile at me and I would walk up and they would start clapping, my classmates. And Dee Dee would have saved a place by her in the front seat and would look up at me and say silently, moving her strawberry lips, "Sit by me. Sit here by me." And the bus pulled up and the door opened, and Wendell looked like the side view on a wanted poster. And I walked up, and nobody would give me a seat. And Wendell looked up in his big mirror, similar to the kind that guards use in penitentiaries, and he said, "Sit down, state law, sit down or I'm not going." I said, "I don't mind, I could just crouch here or something. Just huddle here. I don't mind." I looked at them, my cousins, my classmates, neighbor children, my friends, I thought. "Chucky, can I sit here? Can I sit by you? Barb, sit by you." She looked up. Her lunchbox was sitting by her. She said, "What, you want me to hold it on my lap?" "You can't sit there. Sit by them." No place to sit. He looked up in the mirror. He said, "Sit down or else get off." So I got off. I was 12. What do you do 7 miles to school? Do you walk, or do you go home and tell your parents that you missed the bus? Yes, you're right. So it's 2 hours. 2 hours it took me to walk to school, because I tried to cut across Tollerud's field, and there was a pond there from melted snow, and it didn't look that deep. And I got into it, and then it was a little deeper than I thought. And I had faith that maybe the Lord would just take me across on the surface if I ran fast enough. And I ran across, and I got to the other side, and my new penny loafers were all wet, flopping like slippers. I knew they were ruined. I walked into school, into the classroom. Miss Allison didn't notice me. I slipped in the back door 2 hours late in the 6th grade classroom and slid into my desk just as she said, "Well, today is the day for the class reports on the first sign of spring. Gary, would you like to go first?" Well, this is my report today. 35 years late. She's dead, Miss Ellefson. She's sitting up in the teacher's lounge up in heaven, having a smoke. And this is my report on spring. It's no fun, Miss Ellefson. Spring is a rotten time of year. It breaks your heart. It was years after that, in the spring, when my son was born, and about 5 years, one spring after he was born, we decided that we would let our cat have kittens, so this boy could see the wonder of life in the spring, the beginning of new life. We had a cat named Mrs. Swanson. She was married anyway, so she could have kittens, and we put her out. One day she was in heat. She actually went out on her own. She was in hot heat. She kind of put on some lipstick and went out into the front yard and kind of lolled around there for a while, smoking cigarettes and drinking daiquiris and singing torch songs. And the gentleman cats of the neighborhood sat and watched her. They'd all had operations in their youth. Thought this was odd. They stood there and talked about real estate and IRAs and investment, until finally a cat from a lower class neighborhood came in through the fence and said, "Hi, doll, how are you?" And she screamed at him, and he fought with her, and they made love, I guess. I don't know. And then she beat him up and sent him off squawking. And a while after that, why, the wonder of life happened on our kitchen floor, except she didn't consider it wonderful. The first little kitten in its little sack came out, and she looked behind her with horror and disgust, and she tried to walk away, but it was still attached to her. I'll never forget the look on that cat's face. What is this, she thought. And then there were two more after that. She needed coaxing to do what instinct was supposed to tell her to, but evidently she had forgotten. Finally, she lay there in a box with 3 kittens and looked none too happy about it. And later that night, I got up to see how she was doing, and when I got up and went down to the kitchen, she got up too. And she came and rubbed against my leg, leaving her little family lying there blind and squeaking and hungry and needing her, but she didn't care. She walked to the back door and she scratched on it, and she wanted out. She'd had enough of spring and the wonder of life. And I said, Mrs. Swanson, you can't go now. Look, think on this. Just look at it. You can't go. And I put the hook on the screen door, and she looked up at me. I don't know if you've ever had a mother cat curse at you, just swear at you. She didn't care for spring. She was restless. She wanted to get out and go. Anyway, Clarence, his tooth. Well, I've got to finish that story. He suffered from that tooth most of Friday morning until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when Clint said he knew of a guy in St. Cloud. He said, he's good. You go in there, he'll take care of you. And he did. Clarence got in the car and went in, got in the chair. Half an hour later, without any pain, the tooth was fixed. He couldn't believe it. It just went against his theology of dentistry. It's not supposed to be without pain and so easy. The Apostle Paul wrote about this in his epistle to the Anesthesians, that teeth are supposed to hurt. It's good for you. They're supposed to hurt real hard, and you're supposed to let them hurt and sort of turn this pain towards God's glory through prayer. But Clarence got out easy, and it didn't hurt. He felt so wonderful. He felt romantic and extravagant. He was in St. Cloud. He walked down towards the mall. He saw the sign. He thought, why not? Go and get a haircut. Usually he'd go into a barber shop with a name like Jim's or Bud's, and some old guy in there, he'd sit, read the National Geographic for a while, get in the chair, and have his ears lowered and get an earful of wisdom about the fishing season. But this was a different kind of a shop. It was called Hair Today and Gone Tomorrow. And he walked in the door, and the room was all black and white tile and chairs, and the walls were white with black stripes, and the ceiling was black, and it smelled funny. He sat there, and the magazines were all about womanhood and letting the woman inside you come out. And they were men's magazines, but they were still about this. But he sat there, feeling a little leery, when a girl stuck her head around a corner, and she said, yeah. He said, you're probably too busy to take me, he said, hopefully, rising. He said, you're probably all booked up. You probably can't take me right away. Looking at her, her hair was a kind of an odd tinge of pink. It looked like she hadn't been having enough vitamins, or had been having too many of the wrong kind. She said, no. She said, I can take you right now. She said, my name's Candy. Come on back in. So he followed her back in. into a little cubicle, an ordinary chair. He sat down. She put a red silk cloth around his neck. There were stuffed animals around. She looked like she was about 17. Stuffed bears and elephants and a mirror. She took off his glasses. She said, "What can I do for you? How would you like it?" He would have said the usual, but looking at Candy, couldn't be sure if there was a usual or what it might be. He said, trim around the sides and leave it a little long on top. I kind of like to comb it over the bare spot, don't you know? So she went to work. She had plastic bracelets on both hands that made a clacking sound in his ears as she went along. And he had a bad feeling about this haircut. The longer she went, she didn't talk. She just snip, 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 snipped. She asked him one question. She said, "You live around here?" He said, "No." That seemed to satisfy her. She said, finally, at the end, putting down her scissors, "So, what do you think? Okay?" He reached for his glasses and put them on and looked. And his heart sank, but at the same time, being a Lutheran, he said, "Fine, that's good." She hadn't put on a big red nose on his face or painted on big red smiley lips, but the hair was about right. The hair was about right for a clown, kind of sticking up in strange ways around. She said, $16. He handed her a 20. He said, "Keep the change." A man might be made a fool of, but he still pay extra for the privilege if he's a Lutheran. He walked out of there. He got himself a stocking cap in the drugstore, the last one they had left. The man said, "Care for some hair oil?" Clarence said, "No, just the cap." Drove back home with the cap on his head, getting madder and madder, angrier and angrier, like Wobegonians, like all of us in Lake Wobegone. Get angry about 20, 25 minutes after the fact, when it's too late. But he was steaming when he got in the front door. He was steaming when he walked back to the kitchen and stood in the doorway with his hands on his hips, and Arlene turned and looked at her angry husband, and she said, "Oh, you good-looking man." "Oh," she said, "my goodness, are you handsome? Let me feast my eyes on you," she said. And what they said after that, I do not know, nor would I tell you if I did. That's the news from Lake Wobegone, Minnesota, where all the women are strong, all the men are good-looking, and all the children are above average.